Shalom. Let me. I think that's better. Okay. This. Okay. Back.
Do you hear me okay?
Let me see. Maybe I can do it. Oh, that's why. Okay. There we go. I think that's better. Okay.
Do you hear me all right?
I do hear you. Let me make this a little bit smaller. Okay. Okay. There we go. Sorry for the technical difficulties, people. I'm still getting used to all of this. Antonio. So what are we going to talk about?
Good question.
Well, I wanted to introduce you to people, partially because you're not that involved in Discord. Like, I met you on Facebook in Brett Weinstein's group. Has it been 4 years?
Yeah, I think that's right. It's been about 4 years.
Wow. So I know who you are, but I don't think anybody else watching this knows anything about you. Like when you showed up in Chicago, which was great, and everybody was like, "Who is this guy?"
Yeah,
So
I'm mostly
who is this guy?
So Antonio, and you can probably tell from the name that I'm Mexican and have Mexican origins. I guess I could talk about how, I guess, my upbringing and how I got here and whatnot.
Yeah, how'd you get here?
So from the beginning, I guess. So both my parents are Mexican. My mom's second gen. My dad's an immigrant, and family was a pretty big part of my upbringing. So I was raised in a secular household, so there was no religious aspect to me or my siblings growing up, which I had 3 siblings growing up. I had a brother and 2 sisters. One of them's a twin, and most people don't know that about me, even people who know me in real life.
I think I knew that. I'm not sure though, but go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, she's a lot shorter than me, so it's kind of hard to tell sometimes. But
Hold on, she's your twin?
yeah, my twin.
Oh, that I definitely did not know you had a twin.
Oh yeah,
Yes.
no, yeah, I have a twin.
Oh wow. Okay. Okay, that's
Yeah.
interesting. So, yeah, keep on going. You grew up in a secular household, and uh, what what are you doing here? Like, how'd you get here from growing up in a secular household, and um, how, yeah,
So I've always grappled, I guess, as far as I can remember, with deep questions, even if I didn't consider them deep when I was younger. They were just questions that I had. Uh, you know, conversations with God came up between my parents from time to time because that usually does when you just you're trying to like figure out what is everything. Uh, I always got brief explanations. My dad was very it's just something he didn't really think about too much. He believed in God, but he didn't really want to specify as to what or whatnot. Just kind of left it at that. My mom, she was raised in a Catholic upbringing, as far as I remember, and most of her family was. So she didn't have too great of a time with that. So I guess that's why she kind of ended up where she's at now, and then where she was with raising me and my sister. So it was kind of like this idea of we'll let you guys figure out your own ideas and beliefs, but under our values and whatnot.
mm.
So yeah, I've always wondered about what is this, and is there something more to it, and um, how can we know that? And
So
a lot of
so
my oh, go ahead.
what what interested you in Brett Weinstein?
Oh, so basically, I'll just fast forward to that part into the my exposure with the culture war. So I'd spent most of my life mostly ignorant uh, to politics, to what's happening in the world. I was mostly focused on my own life, and because there's a lot going on in my life growing up. But around 2017 or 18 is when I decided to kind of peek around a bit. And I think the first video I came across was a Ben Shapiro video.
Okay.
And I liked him, not because of what he was saying at the moment and how he was saying it. It was more of like, oh, this guy seems to know what he's talking about, even if he's wrong. He's really passionate about it, and I kind of know more about this guy and see if I can see what he's saying, basically.
Mhm.
And then that led me to Jordan Peterson shortly after, and then I came across Sam Harris as well, and then obviously that led to the YouTube algorithm of showing their I forgot where it was at again exactly, but their long conversation that was mediated between Brett.
Right. Yeah. So
So
Brett was the moderator for one of their like little debates. Yeah.
yeah, that's the one, and I
hmm
watched the whole thing.
hmm
um, yeah,
And
so
what
that
were you thinking? Were you more along the Sam Harris route, the more along the Peterson route?
so
What
at the
exactly?
time at the
Yeah.
time I was totally I liked what Jordan Peterson was saying with the culture war and the politics side and the wokeness stuff, because even though I was pretty ignorant to the culture war, I still knew about concepts like social justice warrior
Okay.
and whatnot. So, uh, yeah, but as far as the religious stuff, I was mostly on the Sam Harris side at that time because it didn't really make sense to me what Jordan was trying to articulate. And I'm
Okay.
more familiar with the atheist point of view, so it kind of just resonated with me more. But
Okay.
I was interested in the Brett guy because he seemed really well grounded and reasonable. And I think it was a video on Joe Rogan. It was like a clip or something showing Jordan Peterson and Brett Weinstein talking about Hitler or something like that.
Okay.
And Jordan made a offhand comment about how Brett had it worse than him at the university and was talking about Evergreen. And I was like, oh, that's weird because we have a college here where I live, because I live in Olympia, Washington,
Mm-hmm.
and it's Evergreen State College. And so I looked into Brett's story, and I found out he was not that far away from me when those events transpired.
Yeah, when I came and visited you, actually, one of the pictures I went and took, I actually went to Evergreen State and I took a picture of myself flicking off the Evergreen, like a sign there or something. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an historic place now.
It is. Okay, and then the so you got involved in Brett's Facebook group, and that's how we started talking.
Hmm.
And I don't really remember like a lot of the conversations we've had. We've been going back and forth for like 4 years,
Yeah.
um, and so um, you started as an atheist. Are you an atheist now?
No, you know
I
that.
do know that.
Yeah.
So what do you believe now?
Well, as you know, I believe in Judaism, but I'm not looking to convert to a Jew.
So this is the very weird place where you are, which is, and which is a surprising place where there are approximately 100,000 people who are don't consider themselves Jewish. They and Orthodox, lowercase Orthodox Judaism doesn't consider them Jewish, but they believe that Judaism is true.
Yeah.
And um, so when over history, generally, when people believe Judaism is true, they thought, hey, so that means I should convert. And they would start the conversion process. And generally in Judaism, our answer to people who want to convert, precisely like it's described in Book of Ruth, chapter 1, is um, no, you don't need to go be a good person. And if people were going to go be good persons, we were like, okay, you know, that has nothing to do with us. And well, that's that's been the general answer for the past 2,000 years since Christianity. Before Christianity, and what you can find in the book of Acts, I believe, is this concept of God-fearers, which were, in fact, Gentiles who believed in the God of Israel because it was such a better religion than all the paganism out there, but they didn't necessarily want to convert. Um, and now, again, we are finding people like you who are like, you know what? Judaism's right, but I don't want to convert.
Yeah.
um, so I guess the first question is, why don't you want to convert?
Um. Well, I thought about it. I really did. Um.
Mhm.
I've read so many Chabad articles.
Chabad, yeah,
Yeah, sorry, that's how I.
yeah.
Yeah, see, been rated wrong the whole time. Uh,
Yeah, it's
um,
Chabad, and yeah. So go ahead. You
well,
you read so many Chabad articles, and
yeah. So there's kind of two different main reasons. One
mhm,
is I don't know if the Jewish lifestyle would work for me. Um,
mhm.
I'm sure if I wanted to, I could make it work. But that's just kind of my general feeling on it. And the second is also based on a feeling, but I feel like the path of Noahide resonates more strongly with me, with what I want to do. Of
Well,
course,
I'm very glad to hear it. Partially because I think part of the problem that the Noahide community has had over the years is the people who were most serious end up converting, or if they don't, their children end up converting. And so it's not a stable community with its own leadership and its own institutions.
Yeah.
Um, and one thing I do want to say is, yeah, as far as like the halachic requirements, for example, not to eat pork, right? We don't, as Jews, we don't believe that like eating pork is sinful, or even like not keeping the Sabbath the way Jews keep it is sinful. In fact, we have this weird belief that Gentiles should not keep the Sabbath the way we do, which is gets
Yeah.
iffy. Um, but so it's not like we the reason why we have a lot of things in Judaism is simply because there is this belief that there is like a priesthood of Israel, and that I would say in a very similar manner that you can be a good Catholic and not a priest. You can be a good person who believes in Judaism and not part of Israel, right?
Yeah.
Um, so and for so for both of those things, I would say a um, a I would like to see I would like to see more people feel comfortable like saying, "Oh, you know what? Yes, that all of this is true. That doesn't mean that I want to do all of the things that that's not a calling that I have had." And for your second thing, um, it seems to me like that is a calling that I was hoping somebody would have, right? To be to be an to be a leader within the Noahide community, because once you make that decision, oh, I don't want to be part of the priesthood in terms of being Jewish, I think a lot of people then think so. I discussed with John Van Donk a lot of this stuff, and I discussed you when you asked Paul Vanderklay if he would perform your wedding ceremony.
Oh yeah.
Um,
He's open to
and
it.
and John and John's response was, well, wouldn't he want a Jew to do the wedding? And I hadn't even thought of it that way, right? But a lot of people seem to have this concept that being a Noahide in some way implies a, I don't want to use the word subservience, but subservience to Jews. And it's like, no, 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 no. We seriously believe that this is a fully contained covenant between Gentiles and God, right? That just because the way I am supposed to relate to God is one way doesn't mean that how everyone's supposed to relate to God is that way. And that doesn't necessarily make me some sort of, clergy for your Noahide community. Whereas I think a lot of people have that concept where, well, if we're Noahides and a Jew comes to our, I guess you would call it synagogue, I'm not sure what exactly you would call it, then um, then does that automatically make Jews like priests in your church or synagogue or whatever you call it? And I would say the answer to that is definitely no.
Yeah, I mean that's not surprising since I think it's a common misconception about what chosen people means in the first place.
Right. Yes.
So
Yeah. Yeah. You know this stuff a lot better, and part of it is I actually don't know how much you know because you're constantly learning, and it's not like you're I am like so I'm not actually quite sure what your beliefs are in ways that are different from, like, what do you disagree with me about? Have you if it's okay if you haven't, it's okay if you
no, I
haven't
mean, as
even
far as the
considered
religious
that,
is
but like,
yeah, as far
mhm,
as the religious is concerned, there's not much I can't think of anything that I disagree with you on.
okay,
Um,
that's
politics is
surprising.
another
You're the
thing.
first person to ever say that to me.
Well,
But
yeah,
go ahead.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, like I said, I was drawn to people like Kierkegaard when I was reading because to
Hmm.
me he was an admirable religious example.
Hmm.
Well, at least in his writings, and whenever I see you talk or engage in the Discord, you bring up things, you clarify things, misconceptions, or respond to challenges, and were in places that I haven't thought about it, where I was actually curious about it. You respond in a way that was satisfying to me, and
Hmm.
it just made me want to look more into it. That's actually how I was drawn into Judaism, because it it just seemed to be more and more of what resonated with me.
Hmm. Yeah, and I do have to say, a lot of times when conversations come up, um, as far as representing Judaism, I try to, when I mention something, um, I try not to include my idiosyncratic stuff, because I, like, for example, I'm pretty sure I've mentioned this to you before, but Ben Shapiro has
Oh yeah,
idiosyncratic views,
yeah.
right? And honestly, I think all Jews have, like, it's part of Judaism that we each individually have idiosyncratic views. Um, and it's not, I think it's very objectionable for somebody like Ben Shapiro, and I think he does do this, to represent his idiosyncratic views, which aren't part of the mainstream. Although that's the funny part. It's you can be inside what we call the four cubits of Jewish law, with very diverse views, um, and the with very diverse views. And when you're talking outside the four cubits of Jewish law, well, I'm not even sure if you would be considered outside the four cubits of Jewish law. No, actually, I would say you probably are within it, but the amount of freedom you have to religiously define yourself is orders of magnitude larger than what even Orthodox Jews have, and we're already a very diverse bunch. And to some extent, I think that's even um, part of what makes it so difficult.
I was gonna say
Is there
that's a strength, that's a positive, and it's also a huge challenge.
Right? I am not going to bother with secular Coranism's many questions, because what she's saying is basically silly stuff, and she doesn't understand what she's talking about. Um, so Chris says, "Are you the same Jewish as Ben Shapiro?" So Ben Shapiro, it lives a life within the four corners, the four cubits of Jewish law, and in that sense, he is an observant Orthodox Jew. Um, I have beliefs which are within the four cubits of Orthodox Jewish life. I am not observant. I don't keep the Sabbath, I don't keep kosher, I don't do all of the things that an Orthodox Jew is supposed to do. And I have my reasons for that. But so I would be considered an unobservant halachic Jew. And most Jews, especially the ones who are involved in Reform or conservative, according to Orthodox Judaism, we would still say, yeah, they are Jews, they are part of Israel by birth, but they are not observant, and most of them don't believe in capital O Orthodox Judaism. I think I think I did. Do you want to add anything to that? Did you want to ask something about that?
I was going to make an offhand comment about how I think it's Messianic Jews.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like they're helping bring people back to Judaism in a sense.
So that is my thought, you know, especially like people like Andrew Clavin. I think so. He went from being, I believe, Reform or conservative. I'm pretty sure he was Reform to being a Christian. And as far as I'm concerned, like that's closer to Judaism than like Reform and conservative are, because honestly, like most Reform and conservative, at least the clergy, don't really believe in God. Fluffy Rabbit, I have no idea what you're asking. May you know the reason for what? I don't know if you think if you want to try to answer that, or
I'm not sure what he's referring to, but
okay. So let me ask
unless he's talking about the Messianic Jew stuff.
Oh,
in that case,
well, it was.
I don't know.
You know what?
Now saw the question.
Yeah, he should think. He wants to know why I don't observe. Oh, there are things in my life which make living an observant life very difficult, and they're individual, personal to my personal thing. You don't like wearing hats. I did live for about 10 years an observant lifestyle. It was part of why I don't was it was the source of great conflict within my own family, and I wasn't the type of person that most people in that situation who want to lead an observant lifestyle will then stop being involved with their family, really. And I was not going to do that. It made zero sense to me, especially considering the 10 Commandments, for me to think that I was being more observant, living away from my family, doing all these Jewish rituals, which I loved. Like I could spend all day praying and learning Torah, and not at the same time maintain the relationship with my family. And it became something I could not handle. So I would say a major, probably the biggest single reason I am not more observant is that the reason I'm not more observant is I want to maintain a good relationship with my family. I need to personally. Like I don't think I could live that life, and it wouldn't make sense to me. So, okay, I hope that's thing. You want to honor your parents? Kind of, yeah. I mean that is a large part of it. I want to maintain a relationship with the rest of my family, of whom very few are thing. Caroline, Is this Caroline?
Yeah, that's the Caroline.
Aha! Great conversation. Can't wait to watch the rest later. We, I mean, Caroline is definitely welcome to come on if she wants to talk. I got to meet Caroline in Chicago, and she was a very nice person, but she was really quiet and didn't talk much.
Yeah. Yeah, she had told me
Yeah.
when they were talking about marriage, and the question kind of came up to her or towards her direction, and she was going to answer, but she noticed everyone was looking at her, and she kind of got overwhelmed. So, yeah, I told her
Yeah.
not to worry about it though.
So I am ignoring secular Coranism's questions because if you've been paying attention to my channel, you realize she is an agent who are for for destroying good conversations, and that's why I'm not letting her do that. I'm sorry. We didn't mean to stare. I didn't mean to stare, but first of all, you were a female in you are a female in a very male uh, thing,
Yeah, there
and
weren't too many females there.
yeah, and at the same time, even like Antonio is not somebody. I don't think most people in Bridges meaning.
Oh no,
I mean,
I'm totally not active at all on a Bridges
yeah,
meeting.
yeah. So it, just you guys both showing up in Chicago was it was really interesting. I would love to talk to you more. Uh, so yeah, a little bit, but you're part of the family.
That's right.
So Eddie says my two faves. Thank you.
Eddie.
So what should I ask about? So what are your plans? Like this is
Like, what am I trying to do right now?
yeah, yeah, I mean, I remember you asked me what you were trying to figure out what all of this means in for you in your life, um, and that's a huge question. So how are you grappling with that? How are you moving forward? What are you now doing in your life as somebody who believes Judaism is true and is a ben Noach, that you weren't doing before? Yeah, like what are you doing? Yeah.
Well, so big reason why I'm not as active on Discord, even within your own server, is because I'm pretty busy in my my actual life, or the life here in Washington, between work and me spending probably still too much time reading and writing and trying to make sense of things. And then I spend a lot of time with my girlfriend these days.
That's important.
Yeah,
That's very important. And I don't think, I mean, yeah, I guess maybe you can have too much time reading and writing and thinking, but I mean, especially you're pretty young. You're still in your 20s.
yeah.
It seems to me that yeah, that this is the time when you have to kind of do a lot of that reading and decide where you're going. What kind of stuff are you reading?
So yeah, like I mentioned earlier, um, shit, how do you say it again? It's Chabad. Is that
Chabad. Just
Chabad?
drop the C. That's
Okay.
just drop the C. Yeah,
So yeah,
Chabad.
I've been spending a lot of time on there,
Mm.
but then lately, because I've been trying to write an essay or some type of document that resembles an essay, and so I've been doing a lot of research for that.
Okay.
And a lot of it's just writing stuff down, and then you know, then I realize something's not right, and then I have to go back, and then I talk to people in real life, and then sometimes I engage on your Discord server.
Wow, you
So
talk to people in real life. What's that
yeah.
like?
So I kind of have a reputation with people who know me. Um,
Ah, that
well,
I am very, very supportive of people having friends and people who know them in real life.
so for example, I think one of the easiest examples to show this is so at Costco we have a tire shop center.
Mhm.
I worked in the tire shop for about 2 years before
Okay.
I was driving forklift, which is what I'm doing right now. But
Mhm.
in the tire shop, it's a really close knit department, and we always like joke around and talk about stuff while we're working. And a lot of the stuff that I end up bringing to the table of conversations was this type of stuff. It was always like a smooth segue into it, but that's just kind of like what I was known for bringing up. And uh, like a year after switching departments, I still walk by the tire shop, and some of the guys are like, "Hey, man, it's kind of miss seeing you there. But there's not
Mhm.
any really good deep conversations now that you're gone."
Okay.
So that kind of like characterizes well, I guess my relationship with a lot of people, just talking about this stuff all the time, thinking about stuff. So
Yeah, and so uh, you went to one estuary meeting, and I want to
yeah,
plug estuary as much as I can because I think it's actually I like I really like where um, PBK is going with estuary and actually having um, people in real life getting together and talking. Um, but I actually had an idea that possibly better than estuary being people getting together and talking. Not that I don't also want to do that, but like having like choirs or having things that are because when I was talking to Father Eric, he was mentioning how a Catholic group is a lot less a
like
Catholic
menacing. No.
what propositional. It's a
Oh,
lot
okay,
less
got it.
propositional, and I one of the criticisms that I've had of PVK and John Van Donk and Sam and everybody else in this little corner of the internet is I think they're too Protestant, and I've made that point several times. Yeah.
And do they know
Um,
what you mean when you say that?
I'm not sure they do. Before I forget, though, Clash of the Titans, right? Or
Oh,
not
Attack
Clash,
on Titan.
Attack on Titan.
Yes.
So tell us about Attack on Titan.
Oh man, I could definitely talk about that for a while. So I've purposely made myself ignorant to the manga, which is just
Okay.
the written version of it,
Yeah.
uh, because I don't want to spoil the anime experience that I've set for myself when it
Right.
first started airing. Like, man, it feels like it was a decade ago. Um,
So just to give some background to this for
yeah,
people who may not know, um, Attack on Titan is a Japanese anime that has actually been incredibly influential, to the point where I saw there was an American article talking about how it's fascist influence, right?
oh yeah,
And PVK mentioned it. Jordan Peterson mentioned it. Um, I don't know if Jonathan Pajot has talked about it at all, but and I actually I've watched a lot more of it than I mean most things. I haven't been watching. I just haven't had time to watch a lot of stuff, but
yeah,
it is really good.
and it picks
Um,
up more and more steam as it goes.
yeah, it's I wouldn't necessarily. There's a lot of what am I trying to say? It's a mystery. It's a mystery novel, and well, novel. It's a mystery series, and in some ways, the one thing I don't like about it is that things are too open for possibilities, right?
Hmm.
There's there isn't enough of it. Um, I'm constantly wondering when the next Deus Ex Machina is going to come out of, like something that's going to change the world and what you're thinking of it radically. But tell, I'll let you talk, but tell us why you like it and why you think it's actually kind of important.
So my friend, one of my best friends, he's watched the show with me, and he's described it as a type of story that's like a Russian doll, where you take it
Mm-hmm.
out and then there's more and more and more, and there's more complexity. That's one reason why I do like this show, because it when I first watched it, like I said, I think it started 10 years ago or a long time. But anyway, it came off unassuming. It just seemed like just another anime, but it was about
Mm-hmm.
titans or giants and then people trying to survive. But like you said, it becomes clear real quick that there's a lot of mystery. There's a lot of unknown. You're trying to figure out like they explain things like how it was, but there's a lot of gaps in understanding and how it got that way and what is beyond the wall, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And as you continue to watch it, I'm not going to spoil anything. You find that's actually it's a very mature show. They explore a lot of humanity, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
and that's why I'm not surprised it got one of those article reviews about it, because it's a very nuanced exploration, basically.
Yeah,
And yeah,
and I think that's part of the reason. So I personally have completely stopped watching anything that's new, pretty much. Like,
yeah,
I just assume. So I've gone back to stuff from the '80s and stuff, um, and for because you already know what the storyline. It's ideologically possessed propaganda. It's not actually exploring things. There's no sense of excitement in not knowing where the story is going to go in pretty much all the other series. Like, you can just expect woke trope after woke trope, and so I think that's probably why it's a thing. I don't know how to say ex Notovia and Tyler Senior. I know who Tyler Senior is from Wheaton. Say, hey, two of our favorite guys and
oh
favorite
yeah,
girl, Caroline. Shout out to all. Oh, is that Christina? I think you may have, but yeah, actually, that's their channel, Sweet Music Medicine. So these are T.S. Apostolos's parents, who
okay,
we
yeah,
got to meet and go to their house and spend a long time. Actually, Happy's here in my office, and and she got to meet your dogs as well. So yeah, yeah, glad to see you guys on here.
very
Um,
pleasant people. My
it,
girlfriend really liked their bird.
it, oh, their bird.
Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. So that's another question. Why did you? Oh, that's how you write Christina in the Greek. Okay, I don't read Greek. Um, so what made you decide I'm going to come all the way to Chicago and bring my girlfriend?
Well, it was a very spontaneous decision.
Okay.
I'm actually a very spontaneous person. Uh, it, may not seem that way, but
I've
honestly, we
always thought
were
of you as pretty deliberate from our interactions, but go ahead, yeah.
yeah. Uh, so we were my girlfriend and I we were thinking about places to go and things to do, and I was on the bridge of the meaning. I'm not sure how I got there. I think it was because Sam may have mentioned it or something.
Hmm.
Um, I saw the Chicago event was coming up, and I was like, "Hey, what if we go?" She was like, "Okay." I'm like, I've also wanted to just try Chicago style pizza because it's
From
kind of like,
Chicago?
yeah, it was a bucket list item for me. I got it out of the way.
Okay.
But I was like, okay, well, I'll see if Jacob's going. If Jacob's going, I'm for sure gonna go, and then you should come with me. And
Okay.
so that's why I messaged you, and you told me you were going. I was like, okay, we'll make
Yeah.
a trip.
It was a lot of fun. I'm still trying to process all of the stuff that was going on, like in all my trip and stuff. And these conversations are part of trying to process everything that's going on there. Um, what did you learn anything there? What was the best parts? What was the worst parts? What would you have changed?
I mean, there wasn't really much I would have changed. I wish I was able to stay there for the was it the Wednesday event,
Mm,
but we were taken off that day, so
yeah.
we weren't able to make it. But for the Tuesday event, both podcasts, I thought they're pretty good. The second one was more engaging, like the podcaster was engaging them in a dialogue,
Hmm.
whereas the first one was more of like an interview.
Okay.
And that was kind of fun. I thought that was okay. Uh, I thought the discussion itself was a topic of big interest for me personally because that kind of ties into the essay I've been working on, in a way because they're kind of talking about moving forward Christian
Hmm.
apologetics and its role. And
Right.
you know, I'm sure you know how I feel about Christianity. It's not negative. It's just I think that there are some things that I think need to be addressed.
Hmm.
It's not that I don't think if Christianity investigated its or if people who were Christians investigated their faith that it would collapse. I don't necessarily believe that. Um, but that is kind of like what happened to me with going to Judaism because I did consider
Hmm.
Christianity first. Um, but I think there's at least the idea when I was at Chicago, I thought what had to happen was it had to kind of like there had to be a defensible Christianity, so to speak. I've been using that word a lot, but I think it's actually relevant.
So, what exactly are your criticisms of Christianity?
Well, I like the Mormon joke you make, so that's it's really it's a big criticism. I watched the live stream or the live stream you had looking at that Protestant guy critiquing Mormonism, and it was like, yeah, I actually genuinely wonder how many Christians seriously contemplate that their scriptures rest upon Jewish scriptures, and what does it say basically, and how are you going to find that out? It's like, well, it seems like a good starting place is what the Jews kind of say about it, because they have because if there's this respect for the church fathers for Christianity, Judaism's been around a lot longer, and then there's like big names like Maimonides and was it Rashi? Is that
Rashi, yeah.
the other? Yeah, yeah. So I'm just really impressed with the foundation of Judaism, and the oral Torah was. I feel like I could read about that all day, honestly.
I could as well. Yeah, this is something I've pointed out to Christians a lot when they attack the Old Testament or Judaism. They're kind of sawing off the branch that they're sitting on, because and they do because and so the more under yeah, the Christian answer that you will get, hopefully somebody who understands what's going on, is that they will say, well, there's a progressive revelation, and we now understand things as we understand the Hebrew Bible as Christians better than people who, and that becomes the whole idea that Christianity is some sort of fulfillment of Judaism. And that's only defensible when you have a very particular view of the Old Testament, which is that it's not just junk, right? And I think too many Christians actually have this idea of like, why bother? It's they saw off the limb of the tree. Okay, so that's
So
one criticism. Yeah.
that's just one I brought up because that was for me that was like a big deal for me when I was
Mm-hmm.
personally looking into it. But if we just want to start with the two, there's like two big criticism I have that I feel like every Christian needs to address. I'm not saying
Mm-hmm.
every Christian falls in this category of running afoul of it, but a lot of Christians that I know in real life here seem to fall in one of these two camps, basically. And the first one is biblical, was it literal interpretation, basically across the
Mm-hmm.
whole way. Um, like I said, I work with somebody. She's a sweet girl, really nice. She was raised Christian fundamentalist, like
Mm-hmm.
from the get go all the way to now,
Mm-hmm.
and that's fair enough. But there's a lot there's a lot of things that are problematic with that view, um, and it's usually incompatible with, let's say, scientific uh, knowledge that we acquire. And I
Mm-hmm.
don't think science is this absolute force of knowledge either, but I think it's not something that you can just, it counts as a form of evidence. And I don't think disregarding or denying evidence is a good thing,
Mm-hmm.
especially for defense of your faith. So that's one. And the second thing is kind of on the other end, where I see people want to minimize God, um, the God from Scripture, to what's effectively the gaps of human knowledge, and they want to reduce his role so much because they're so afraid of what I consider naturalism, or the naturalism that is in science at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
That he's either removed completely from those gaps, where it's like, well, he made he made everything, but every way that he's interacted with it has been through like a normal sense, and I
Mm-hmm.
feel like that's not scriptural.
Mm-hmm.
That's just you're gonna come. I don't even know if you qualify to be a Christian at that point if you buy to that view. And then the other way is where you just kind of relegate him towards the unknown. So like
Mm-hmm.
before Big Bang, or um, I'm sure there are some places in quantum physics to shove him in there, but
Mm-hmm.
those are the two uh, glaring
Mm-hmm.
points of weakness for me that I've identified.
Well, I think that those two kind of go together. For me, like the idea of l- taking the Bible literally, I don't think you can actually do that, especially in translation. But um, even not in translation, right? Uh, I think the idea, it is a very nominalist or modernist way of looking at things, where if the Bible talks about sunrise and some sunset, then that must mean that the sun moves and the earth doesn't. And I think that's not taking the Bible literally. I think that's just putting a very specific frame on it, which you don't necessarily recognize your own presuppositions. And this is the way in which I think postmodernism makes a good critique of modernism. And that's why, like, I talk about the post nominalist neo Platonism, right? taking all of that in. But yeah, those two things, it seems to me, are very related. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is something I actually want to know more about from you. But my understanding within Judaism is that there's like a very flexible aspect of Torah interpretation, and that doesn't mean it's whatever you want to think, but that there are um, is it exegetical or exegetical
Yeah.
principles?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so, but what that means is, like, take Genesis for example. Um, my understanding is it's like, well, that that could have very well happened, but whether it actually happened or if it was, metaphorically um, true. God, I didn't want to use that phrase, but you know what I mean. It doesn't make a difference towards what the Torah is trying to teach us, basically. So it's like there's some flexibility. Like I don't know if that's under your 4 cubits or corners thing
Yeah,
that you were talking about.
it's the four. That is more of a 4 cubits thing, because I will say there are definitely different opinions about how, for example, how metaphorical um, or literal you take Genesis, on, and we have this disagreement, hopefully well represented on my server. I try. Certainly, my discussion with Chezi, and I'm constantly calling Yosef a heretic, right? Even though Chezi, so Chezi and Yosef are both uh, on my server. I have them at the rank of Elohim, right? Which is actually not such a great rank of among the rankings of the angels, but I did that kind of for rhetorical purposes, because I know Christians are like, no, you can't call human beings Elohim, and it's like, no, 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 we can, we do. But so that rank I kind of reserve for people who I would call rabbis, right? And Yosef, in a very real sense, even though he doesn't like it, is kind of the rabbi of our community. And Chezi, even though he's far too busy to be that involved in our community, he definitely qualifies for that rank. If he had the time, he could definitely be uh, our rabbi if he wanted to. So, and we have very different ways of looking at a lot of this stuff, and that's fine, because there is 4 cubits, and different people are in different places in that 4 cubits, and yeah.
But then there's also the 13 principles that were laid out by my mom. Jeez, that's
Maimonides,
always
yeah.
a tongue twister for me.
Yeah, the way a rabbi has really made it in the Christian world is when he has a Greek name. So the two that have Greek names are Maimonides and Nachmanides. Both of them, so, were named Moses. So Moses Maimonides, in the Hebrew, is Moshe ben Maimon. His father's name was Maimon, so that's how he became Maimonides.
Oh,
And
okay.
the other, it was Moshe ben Nachman, the Ramban. We refer usually to the Rambam and Ramban. So that's Maimonides and Nachmanides. And but the funny thing is, actually Rashi is probably is much more, well, maybe, I mean, he's definitely very fundamental to Judaism, and he doesn't have a he doesn't have a Greek name, and he's not very well known by Christians at all.
Yeah.
How did we go down this road? The
The
13
13
principles of
principles,
rape.
yeah.
Yeah, and even that, I mean, I think, while I would say generally everybody in big O orthodoxy generally would say that they are definitional to what is considered inside of orthodoxy. I think some people would even say even that is more of a defined theological orthodoxy than Judaism necessarily demands, because part of really the disagreement between Christianity and Judaism is Christianity has a very big belief in orthodoxy, right? The believing the correct this certain things, and Judaism has a much bigger emphasis on orthopraxy, right? Do you actually do? And, in this corner of the internet, when we talk, Jordan Peterson talks a lot about, well, what do you know what you believe, right? What you act out is actually what you do believe, right?
Yeah.
And so I think Judaism also very much has that, you know, whether or not I believe in the 13 principles of faith, I do. That's not, nobody's standing at the synagogue door saying to me, "Are do you believe these 13 principles?" Uh, there, to some extent, there is a difference within if because I drive on the Sabbath, like because I don't keep kosher, that it's because my actions don't follow what is the communal standards that really defines whether or not you are within the 4 cubits. And I would say the same thing does even more so goes by what can be considered within the 4 cubits for a Noahide, because yeah, we have these 7 rules, right? 7 categories more of things that they're not necessarily just beliefs. I mean, they're in fact they're more actions, right? So it doesn't really matter if you say I believe Judaism is true if you're stealing or killing people or being inhumane to animals or getting involved in prescribed um, sexual things that are
Yeah.
not allowed, then that much more so defines in Jewish terms if you are in the 4 corners than if you believe that the 7 days of creation were literally 7 days of 24 hours or not.
Well, it makes sense. It wouldn't be rigid because you're expected to wrestle throughout your whole life,
Yeah,
right? So you're not, and
yeah,
the action is important.
yeah. What you do, who you are, how you grow, and this idea that I am here in my life. God, God has put me where He has put me in order for me to be learning and to either be getting closer to Him or further away, right? And that's a choice we make on a daily basis, and to a real extent, I mean, that's a choice you're making on a daily basis. My theology today isn't what it was even a few weeks ago, but certainly years ago. And to the same extent, I think your theology obviously has changed over the past 4 years that I've known you, and yeah, it there is that constant wrestling that you're going to have to do for the rest of your life, right? Who I don't know, and if we're being um, if we're being honest, I don't think we can know where we're going to be in 10 years, and If we think we are, we're I think that's just hubris and in some sense like Dunning Kruger.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's definitely a complete 180 from like a lot of Protestant Christians that I was exposed to growing up. Uh, but I was gonna say this is actually a surprisingly complicated topic because my first inclination was just to say, well, yeah, it's important to do the practices and whatnot. But if you don't really believe there is God, or if you don't believe that the the Torah was divinely handed down, it's like, well, it kind of negates the whole point of Scripture in a way. But
Mm-hmm.
on the other hand, it's not that simple because, like we said, you're expected to struggle and maintain the practice has value. That's not even that's like the least way to put it. um, but yeah, we don't know where we're gonna go.
Yeah. So, and one of the terms I've started using a lot is religion is a pathway. It's not a destination. You know,
Yeah,
you're yeah.
and I've always liked
So
that.
Fluffy Ribbit asks, "What are the four cubits of Judaism? How do you wrestle with God?" I'll take the first question. You can take the second question.
Okay.
The four cubits of Jewish law, that is a term we use in Judaism to refer to basically the boundaries within which your actions are still considered part of the Jewish community. So keeping the Sabbath, keeping kosher, all of the things that Torah requires of all of us. And part of the reason we describe it as four cubits is, people there's wiggle room there, right? You're not at a single point. You can move within those boundaries. So how do you wrestle with God, Antonio?
I was just gonna say the simple answer is it's a lot of why questions. But I
Yeah.
mean, they're not always the same. Uh, I think a lot of it comes up when there's tragedy or when you get to witness malevolence, either firsthand or secondhand. Um, then there's also, when you struggle with your faith, there's a lot of why questions there as well. Like, why couldn't it have been a little more obvious? Not saying super obvious, just a little more obvious. um, yeah.
Yeah. Um, so, yeah, I think certainly when you believe that there is a God who created the universe and runs things, there, when you run across the ways in which this world is imperfect, it's part of that struggle, right? But at the same time, uh, I think you can understand the Jewish idea that the the world is imperfect, which gives us a chance to improve it, right?
Yeah, it's almost like there's the intellectual struggle and then the existential struggle. And I find that when people try to address the existential with the intellectual, it's a very dissatisfying answer and outcome. And you talked about some examples of people who walked away from their faith because of that in your discussion of theodicy.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Glenn Lowry. I'm waiting for his book to come out. He is writing an autobiography right now, and
Oh,
Bart
wow.
Ehrman. Yeah, that's going to be interesting. And Bart Ehrman has said similar things, and Heather McDonald also says that's why she's an atheist. Is she just can't believe that God created this. And for
Yeah.
me,
Yeah.
um, I actually had a very opposite reaction when I was driving these past 3 weeks. Like you see all the things in the world that, and it's like I have a very hard time understanding how someone believes that all of this is just randomly came into being without any intellect or design behind it.
Well, that's the most fascinating part about my whole journey is I'm I'm sensing a lot of change in myself, mostly through the I guess in terms of attitude. Um, that's the most surprising. It's almost unsettling, but it's a positive unsettling. um, I don't know. I find in really just small interactions
Mhm.
that are unexpected. I think differently than I otherwise would have before.
Okay.
Um, like I have a lot. Like I still am impatient to a lot of like we're all impatient to some extent,
Mhm.
um, and then sometimes more than others. But I find that I'm consistently more patient. Uh, like when it comes to like take let's say Bart Ehrman, right?
Mhm.
Like when I first read his story, I was like, "See, this is why Christians have to get their faith right because this is what happens." But I don't think that anymore. Uh, I think everything happens for a reason, and
Mhm.
um, you can't you can't see why things are the way they are, not clearly, and who knows
Mhm.
what opportunities. And then obviously there's a lot of agency involved as well. So I'm not like I don't subscribe to the determinist thing.
Good. I'm
um,
glad to hear it.
yeah,
Um, yeah, no, and I think that's part of having a proper theology, which both understands our ability to affect the world and God's sovereignty, which are in fact, I mean, it is a miracle that God lets us human beings do anything, make the world. So I keep on going back to Cain and Abel, right? Okay, Cain decided to kill Abel. Um, why did God let Abel die? Right? Um,
the hard questions.
yeah, no, and it's very fundamental. Um, yeah.
I I'm not sure why I was doing a search within your Discord. I was looking for something, but I came across a conversation a while ago talking about first cause. And I didn't know you actually made this comment, and I was really glad to see you make it. But you were, I forgot who you were talking with, but it was in response to somebody, I think, who was really certain of the first cause principle or the idea and the reasoning and the logic and all that. But you explained to them that it's hard to convince someone who doesn't buy into that in the first place, and that there is like another way of looking at it where like you don't have to believe that there had to be a first cause, for example. It could have
Oh,
just been,
right. Yeah, the steady state hypothesis, like,
yeah,
yeah, maybe things just existed. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. And the reason why I was glad to see you make it is because I guess maybe that was the one point of disagreement that I never vocalized before. But I don't think I
Mhm.
disagree with you now because you acknowledge that there is that viewpoint. I'm not saying that it's more valid or um,
Mhm.
you know I don't even think it's equally 50-50 like I would once describe it. I don't actually believe that anymore. But the important point about it is you can't, in my opinion, you can't rest so easy in your faith about things. Um, I think it's super important to not do that. Um, but I don't
Yeah.
know. I
No, I think so. This is a big part of living a life of repentance, which is, thinking again, right? God, there, and the struggle, right? Like you live your life in a way that sometimes it waxes and wanes, right? You There are times when it's absolutely obvious to me that the Torah is true, and there are times when I'm like, maybe I'm just crazy, right? Um, but it's yeah, I think that's part of the human condition and why we call it faith, right? It wouldn't be a faith if, you don't say, I have faith in, uh, what am I trying to say here? You don't use the word faith in things that are absolutely 100%. It's when you're struggling with something that's beyond what is easily knowable that faith walks into it.
Yeah, I would agree.
Fluffy Ribbit. It's really interesting to see the intersection between the necessity for humility, the necessity for accountability, and God's sovereignty. What is your stance on free will at this intersection? So I have to say, I've started calling this Jacob's razor, which is if um, if you're making an argument that if you believed it, basically you should just shut up. um, I don't take that argument seriously. So I would say for people who say that, oh, it's all deterministic and we don't have free will, right? So if that's true, then there's no point in actually discussing it. So just shut up, right?
There's no need to convince anyone.
There's no need to convince. There's no effect. Like it's so when you have this absolute idea of God's sovereignty, in which I think, I mean, Calvinists. This is part of what I'm going to talk about with PVK once I get him on my channel. Is you know, so we have the double predestination thing of Calvinism, and whenever I confront PBK about it, his answer is, well, they don't act like they believe in it, right? And my question becomes, what are you talking, like, if your beliefs are not what's guiding your actions, then why are you telling me that this is an important belief that you have, right? If you're telling me that we should believe in double predestination, um, then um, your actions should actually kind of like reflect that, right? And I think they do reflect that, and that's why I think Calvinism is so poisonous. I don't want to
I was
just
going to say about
dominate.
that. No, no,
Yeah.
I forgot what I was going to say. I had to deal with that. But, oh, yeah, I was going to say that the fact that people do bring up the free will determinism thing, it's not even specific to this conversation,
Mhm.
but that it seemingly contradicts what the view entails, I think suggests something about the person in question. Like if someone's trying to advance that there isn't free, or that we shouldn't even be alive, for example,
Right.
right? It's like you mentioned the other day, why don't you just off yourself, right? Well,
Yeah.
that's not the goal, though. I don't think the goal is just to off oneself. I think the goal is something like, um, if they can't have it, no one else can, type of thing.
I think that's
And
part of it. I think sometimes people bring this stuff up because they hope you can, in fact, change their minds about it.
yeah, see,
Um,
there's a
yeah.
lot of different explanations for that.
Um, I think there's definitely a pro to this stance regarding humility, which is why I think Calvinists affirm it. But you have to take it a certain way, or it's stupid. I mean, it's funny. A lot of times when I talk about God's sovereignty, um, Paul and Van Donk will tell me that it's very Calvinist of me, right? So there are times when I say, you know what ends up happening isn't up to me, and they're like, oh, that's very Calvinist thinking, and I just think that's
Sounds like a rejection of nuance.
okay, yeah, it's
I think Abad has a good article on that too. By the way, I've read it.
oh, which article? Like what
It's
is it?
talking. I forgot the title, but it's talking about that tension between uh, the sovereign and the well, free will, basically.
Right. Okay.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
and there is a
Yeah.
tension, but it doesn't end in double predestination. I don't think.
I completely agree with you. Yeah. My personal explanation is God gives us free will as it's a miraculous choice. That's the only way I can explain why it is that we as human beings, like why God lets us do the things we do, is because he's giving us an opportunity. That's why he let Cain kill Abel, because allowing us to live in this world where God doesn't constantly correct us gives us an opportunity. Like if God had killed Cain and resurrected Abel at that moment, then Cain would not have had the opportunity to repent. Whereas the way I see it now, yes, Cain will be punished for what he needs to be punished for. He will be rewarded for his repentance, because we do believe Cain will eventually repent. Um, but Abel is also going to have that resurrection. And I think that's part of why it's so important. Um, I mean, it is one of the 13 principles of faith, like believing in the physical resurrection, because um, if you look around the world and you see people who live, who are good people who die horrible deaths, or lead or suffer greatly before they die, this hope of a resurrection is just incredibly important.
Yeah.
So, were there things you wanted to ask or talk about?
Well, I definitely want to talk about this bacon guy. But it is still pretty fresh, so I don't have it in my head. Is
I
um,
actually don't know that much about Bacon. I recognize the name. I'm not sure that I've actually read his thoughts.
yeah, it was the first time I came across him when I read this article from a Christian creationist website of all places. I did not expect to find myself there, but
Okay.
it was actually a very surprisingly uh, well written and balanced article.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Francis
Francis
Bacon.
Bacon. Yeah,
Yeah.
and so it tells a story of kind of like what transpired and how we got to where we're at as far as naturalist science is being performed. And I would say naturalist, not even thinking, because it's on a deeper level than thinking. It's axiomatic, and I feel like that's where I was at basically my whole life. And then Kierkegaard maybe confront that axiom. I guess you could think of it that way, because that's like the it's not a danger. I don't want to be alarmist, but that's the power of this thinking. It's not even naturalism itself. It's just the what I consider the illusion and now a mass delusion of neutrality, like we were talking about the other day. I don't believe there's neutrality in your fundamental beliefs. It's either one or the other. It's either or. Um, sure, you're going to have some uncertainty and agnosticism about it, but at the end of the day, you're going to act, and what your actions, they're going to reflect what you believe, um, even if it's not so obvious. But basically, I had mentioned the other day on your live stream that I saw this narrative, the Enlightenment, as kind of knocking down something that had planted the seeds for its own destruction, so to speak. So this kind of delves into that story of what happened, and so my understanding, fresh understanding of Bacon, is not even so much him specifically, but it was his approach, and then the legacy of that approach that others adopted after him. And so his approach to science was one of this, they call it a two-book approach. So he separated scripture from science. And what he ended up doing, like what he had in mind, and when I was reading this, I was like, oh man, this is something that I probably would have done if I lived in that time. I could have set off the meaning crisis. But basically, he had this idea that, well, it's like two books from the same author. And so what we expect to find in nature should correspond to scripture. It should even validate it. And so what he had done was he assumed neutrality, that epistemological neutrality, and that through nature we can find truth claims not just scientifically but theologically. And that's kind of where the birth of natural theology came from. And so what he had done inadvertently, and I believe this, is that he had smuggled in naturalism into that thinking, because he thought you could start from this neutral point of ignorance, and it's like it's either going to go towards God exists or God doesn't exist. And when he assumed neutrality, he basically let God doesn't exist as the presupposition. And that didn't become obvious until much later down the road, because during his time, the culture was very much conforming to scripture. So then fast forward a bit, you have these Baconian scientists, and I have a good time calling them Baconians. I I think it's funny. But anyway, they start running into trouble and having to make compromises, because they're just start scientific breakthroughs start coming in. And I know geology was like one of the first ones that kind of made people who hold scripture to be holy to kind of squirm, and it made them nervous. And then not much longer after that, you have Darwin, and with evolution and biology. And so basically they were discovering all these things about the natural world independent of a belief in scripture. And these Baconian scientists who were still dedicated towards their beliefs, they retreated into deism, and that's kind of where deism kind of emerged. And so they were cornered into deism, still ignorant to the presupposition of naturalism that was smuggled in. And so it was like a coup d'etat, basically, and the naturalists kind of sealed the deal by using that claim of ignorance against the deists. Like, hey, we started from a place of neutrality, and this is kind of like where it ended up. Like, this was, it wasn't biased towards any direction. And then the way I see it is the deists of that time is basically their legacy is what I see now as those Christians that I described earlier, who fall into one of those two camps, and how they deal with scientific knowledge and discoveries. And so what had gone wrong was, from the get-go, naturalism was presupposed. And so it took a while, but eventually it just kind of like erupted. And then I would say that was the genesis of the meaning crisis, as far as I'm concerned, because that's when, let's say, the Judeo-Christian grand narrative was overthrown, basically.
I'm gonna have to think about all of this stuff.
Yeah, I've been thinking about it a lot. It's a pretty interesting story.
Yeah. So Rabbi Soloveitchik in Halachic Man addresses. Um, yeah, this it's a difficult balance between the the naturalistic fallacy, right? The supposed empiricism and the idea of nature's God. Because, so theologically, um, there are certain expectations we have about the world based on theology.
Yes.
And um, so, because theologically we believe God created the world, we believe that the world and what we see and how we are able to perceive it is in fact a form of revelation. And I think that's what serious people mean when they talk about um, natural law and nature's God and a very naturalistic way of looking at it. If they are theologically um, nuanced enough. I'm sorry, my jet lag is
No,
suddenly
no.
hitting me.
I
Yeah,
You're good.
and this is I'm gonna have to think about the stuff you said
Well, and I want to
because
say too,
yeah.
the reason why I came across this, I'm remembering, is because I was thinking, okay, if naturalism is its own thing and it's distinct from science, could it actually be separated from science? Because to me, it's not obvious what the alternative is. Because if you have to presuppose something, I'm not convinced. I'm still not convinced that if we didn't presuppose something like what we expect to find are conforming to the laws of nature, we wouldn't have
Mhm.
made the progress we did. And so I'm not convinced that supernaturalism was the alternative. And so this article was, I'm going to send it to you because it was
Yeah,
kind of a
I
big
want to
deal,
read it.
because the alternative wasn't supernaturalism, but they said that the alternative would have been a biblical scriptural approach to science. So like, what does that mean? Because most people who are atheists, who don't know much about the Bible, their understanding of the Bible is it's full of the supernatural and miracles. But as far as I understand, miracles are not the normative means of God's interaction with nature. Um, like they do exist, but they're relatively few and far between, basically. And
Yeah.
that was kind of like, it goes back to that one lady at Yale in her video. She's talking about how Judaism arose in the Near East, and
Mhm.
so the relationship of God to His creation is actually upholding it in its consistence. That God is logical, regular, and orderly, basically. And
Yeah.
so, as far as I'm concerned, functionally, the main difference between that view and naturalism is just one that doesn't rule out miracles or the historical record of Judaism or Christianity. And then
Right.
there's also an additional theological incentive to want to explore nature, because it is God's creation, so to speak, that you want to learn more about it. And so that kind of like blew my mind when I first read it. Um,
I'm gonna have to read this article. It sounds really interesting.
yeah.
Um, Ardleen, I'm not sure if I know you. I think this is your first time on the channel. I'm not sure. My Abel Cain hot take is that Abel sinned by letting his brother feel awful while smuggling it up in his blessings. This is rampant theological error, my friend. What you are doing uh, is what Job's friends did, which is say, oh, well, this person suffered, therefore this person must have done something wrong. And that is really punting the um, question of theodicy. You can't and to some extent, I think this is the holy spark that is that keeps Christianity alive, is this idea of innocent people do in fact suffer, and that it is in fact somehow contributing to and the idea of the suffering servant, obviously it's in Isaiah. This is this is a whole discussion I actually want to have with Kazi and Yosef. But yeah, what you're doing there is theologically really, really problematic, because you are saying precisely like they did that that because something bad happened to them, it's they must have sinned. The connection to Job is excellent, nice. I don't think I'm exactly using that logic, but it's a cool analogy. That's what it seems to me like you're doing. It seems like a lot of things can be explained as natural. Where do you think the ism creeps in?
Where it goes further to say that there's nothing beyond natural.
Okay. Yeah, where it says that this is all, so basically nominalism, right? So the idea that there isn't a thing. Humans are smart and have figured out a lot about the world. Where does that become an anti-theological ideology?
With bacon. I'm serious too.
Okay, I mean, I'm gonna have to read this article, because it does sound interesting, and I honestly I know nothing about bacon. How can we take our suffering and offer it as a sweet smelling sacrifice to God? Yeah, wasn't Bacon a monk? I don't know, was he?
I know he's religious.
Okay. So this actually, Fluffy Ribbit, if you think you can understand all the Hebrew and Jewishese that we used when I spoke with Chazi, I think we did address this. The suffering. Yeah, I think you are in a real sense talking about something very important there. That the world, that we will eventually understand, and that theodicy is not just an idle act, because I think a lot of, especially Protestants, would say, well, theodicy is a problem, and if you don't think it's a problem, great, right? Let's not bring it up, and if it doesn't come up in your thinking, that's better than if you were to actually think about it. And I think that's the opposite of struggling with God, which is what we're doing here. You have to wrestle with God, like Antonio's been saying. Okay. I am going to try to do a Hebrew Bible in English tonight at 6, which is in not too many minutes. I don't know. I mean, honestly, like my jet lag just hit me. So I want to stop in like another 9 minutes. So these are your 9 minutes. What do you want to talk about?
I think I mostly talked what I want to talk about. I guess just to recap, I found myself. Well, I came from atheism. Went through a lot of bumps, and found myself here in this meaning crisis, this culture war. I guess I found the culture war before I found the meaning crisis, and then realized that, I really believe the Ming crisis set off the other crises, which would, as a whole, make up the culture war. That's kind of this guy named Peter Limberg, I think is his name. He wrote a really good Medium piece that succinctly describes the culture war. Basically, like without this grand narrative, reality just kind of fragmented into competing realities, and then that atomized society, and then people found tribes, and as you can see, the tribes are kind of at an epistemological war with each other about what is real or isn't real. And that's a big deal because if we can't even agree on what's reality, we can't make progress on anything, which is where we're kind of at as far as I'm concerned. So, yeah, that's, yeah. I guess, so this is the long way to answer your question of what I'm trying to do or what I'm doing is, well, I'm trying to work on being a better person. I'm going to see what I can do with what it means to be a Noahide. It's like of utmost importance to me, and I have my art scroll to knock now, so I'm really excited to read it.
Okay.
So there's that, and then, like I said, this essay I'm writing. My goal is to have it finished by next estuary, which is next week, so I can present it, and I'll send you it when it's finished. But that goal basically embodies what I think is the crux of this Ming crisis and culture war, which is basically this smuggled in axiom that was under the guise of neutrality. And so the reason why it's a big deal is, one, if you're not self-aware of your own beliefs, that makes you highly susceptible to things like ideological possession. But more importantly, or maybe just as important, it kind of relinquishes responsibility. And I think what you end up seeing from that is, cognitive distortions abound, basically. So, like, for example, this isn't my interpretation. This is reality. Like, this is how it is. And it's like, no, not exactly.
Right. So. Yeah. I'm considering. I am going to start doing a series. I'm thinking of calling it Propositional Post-Platonism or something like that, which is going through actual propositions, like, because I tried with post-Platonic not to be propositional, and it's really hard to be propositional without importing a lot of things that aren't necessarily part of it. And I wanted to leave that flexibility because I ultimately
the 4 cubits of humanity.
Yeah. I mean, I come at things at a very Jewish point of view, because that is my point of view, and I would like to foster a broader post-Platonic thing, which isn't just, oh, this is what Jacob or Judaism says. It's something that our little corner of the internet can form community around. And one of the reason I brought this up is I'm probably going to start with all models are wrong, some are useful, because the underlying mistake, I would say, of postmodernism and critical theory and criticism is this belief that, oh, well, I found a flaw in your model, therefore it's worthless. And it's like, no. All of them are going to be flawed because we as human beings are finite things.
I think that's a tactic employed to advance their own agenda. Which, in my opinion, is to kind of burn everything down. So
I've struggled with this. I think there's definitely at least some Baptists and bootleggers going on where you have different people who have different motivations, and
Yeah.
you're going to anytime you have human beings you're talking about.
Yeah. I just know seeking destruction doesn't require a conspiracy. So the people who are trying to advance it, they can just infiltrate all these groups with different motivations, and it's not hard basically. And
Yeah, PVK was kind of talking about that with the leftists leaving the CRC. He's like, once you're not just deconstructing and criticizing, you're going to actually have to establish something, and you're going to find that a lot more difficult than the conservatives. And I think that's kind of true of what's going on in the broader culture as well. Okay, I think we're gonna leave it there.
all right.
I will likely at 6, which is in a few minutes, do a Hebrew Bible in English. I'm not sure because honestly, I just got hit. Yeah, I'm like kind of falling asleep. And the more I think about it, the more I'm like, you know what? Let's leave Hebrew Bible for next week.
Sure, they'll forgive you.
Yeah, people can watch this. It's much more important. Okay.
Right, well, thanks for having me on.
You are always welcome, and hopefully this will be the beginning of more conversations. And people can comment below. Please like, subscribe, all that jazz. And one of these days, Antonio is going to have to start his new channel because he's going to have to lead the ship of the Noahides forward.
Yeah, this is true, and I'm going to take back the rainbow.
Okay. Although you have to realize that Noah, so I'll leave with this. So in Judaism, it's actually okay. You have the I actually have not read that yet, and I should. The part. So in Judaism, we don't point rainbows out to people solely because it says that it is a sign that God is remembering his covenant with Noah, that he will not destroy the world. So it's really a sign of God's anger, which, yeah, it's interesting with what it's become. Like, we are in June, but yeah, I mean, certainly a lot of people do use stuff like that. Okay, I am going to end this broadcast.